The Gilded Age is back this week with the 6th episode of Season 3, and within this episode it was clear to see that it was all about deals being made. Whether it be between George and Edgar, Jack and the Forte household where he was being asked to leave, Larry and the copper mines in Arizona, Oscar and Maud Beaton, and even Gladys and Lady Sarah as she looked to cement her position as a woman of authority. Oh, and it's safe to say that eggs weren't the only thing that got broken, as Oscar, Marian and Ada's hearts were all shattered for 3 completely different reasons. So with that, let's dive into this week's episode and break down all that there was to take away from it. Here is the Gilded Age Season 3 Episode 6 Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. Gladys and Bertha. Finally! It's about time that we got to see mother and daughter actually acting like one, and Bertha contributing to Gladys's life in a positive way, rather than in a way which sends her down the aisle with a ball and chain around her ankle. Bertha was all about putting Lady Sarah in her place and teaching Gladys to know her purpose and to let her voice be heard, rather than being worn down like a puppy, which is exactly what Lady Sarah was trying to do to her. All it took was Bertha simply telling Gladys how she was the woman of authority in the house and that she should own it for her to be able to finally stand up to her. With Lady Sarah being put in her place by Bertha on the evening of her arrival, I think that's what allowed Gladys to see that Sarah was just a mere mortal and that she did have the capability of being taken down a peg or two. It was said that Lady Sarah looked out for the Duke following their parents dying, so that's why she had this authoritative figure and why the Duke never really had an opinion on the matter. 'Cause I suppose she essentially became the mother. But with Gladys standing up for herself at dinner and deciding when it was that the women were going to leave the table, Lady Sarah was stunned into silence, and we even saw Hector sticking up for Gladys too, realizing that he didn't need to be under the thumb of his sister. The thing with Lady Sarah is she's obviously used to the position of power that she had in the house because she's had it since their parents died when they were younger. But I also imagine that there's a sense of fear that's present within her because she most likely feels like she's been replaced and doesn't hold the weight that she once did. Hence why she's been going at it with an iron fist approach. But it seems like with Bertha leaving, Gladys is now going to be able to mirror her mother and start to get what she wants, which is something that Bertha always gets. Outside of England, we saw that the leaking of information was something that was still happening at the Russells' house, and there were suspicions that it could be Miss Andre, Bertha's maid. There was a line that was spoken in this episode when Miss Andre reported to Bertha about what Lady Sarah said about Gladys, and Bertha said, "Keep your ears to the ground." This felt like it was a subtle nod to the fact that it's what she's already doing with the information around the house, and that she could be the one sharing it. So it's going to be interesting to see if she is in fact the leak. Oscar. Blimey, I didn't expect that to happen at all, did you? Poor John Adams was hit by a horse and carriage, and it seems like he's a goner, but we'll get to that. Oscar found out about Maud Beaton working at the Haymarket, and in this episode he went to confront her. To be honest, he was relatively sympathetic towards her, and even though there was one moment where he shouted and the fury came out of him, other than that he was relatively composed. It turned out, like predicted, Maud Beaton was just as much a pawn in Crowther's game as what Oscar was, and she was played the fool like he was too. Crowther walked away with all of the money and left her with nothing. Oscar showed how much he'd changed as a character though, because after hearing about the life that she was living at the Haymarket, being subjected to sell herself in order to survive, he gave her $100 and a ticket to Ohio so that she'd be able to start a new life somewhere else. Right at the end of the episode, we saw that John Adams was pleased with the work that Oscar had done with his investments, and they both shared an intimate exchange where Oscar thanked him and said how he was his savior. But then, as John Adams left, he stepped into the road and was hit by a horse and carriage. I think this is something that has the potential to break Oscar, and it could send him on a downward spiral. A spiral that it feels like we've only just seen him recover from. He loved John Adams deeply, and he was essentially the love of his life, so it's going to be heartbreaking to watch. George Russell. Now, I don't think anything sums up George Russell's storyline more than when he said, "Everything I own is on the brink of collapse." JP Morgan tried to get the railroad project back on track in this episode by bringing together the Merricks and also Clay and his new partner. George managed to get Edgar to agree to selling a part of the Central Line, which would in turn give George 51%, but most importantly, the ability to make the decision to then build the railroad from east to west. However, with Clay unhappy about that decision, he leaked some information to the press about the Russells' financial situation, which meant that Edgar pulled out of the deal, JP Morgan stopped picking up the phone, and nobody else was willing to invest. Essentially meaning that George Russell's reputation was being dragged through the mud and nobody wanted to be near him in the slightest. When he said how he'd be willing to watch all of his businesses burn, it showed the ruthless nature that he had and that he'd die on his sword, which was telling of the character, and it showed that he was true to his traits. George having this to deal with, along with all of the scheming that Bertha had been up to, and also the financial hit in the marriage that Gladys and the Duke had, something that his daughter didn't even want. I imagine it's going to put more of a strain on George and Bertha's marriage, and that divorce could be on the horizon. The Russells are all over the newspapers when it comes to their name being tarnished, so they're going to reach breaking point eventually. Marian and Larry. I'm not gonna lie, I can understand why Marian is upset, because it's not only the fact that Larry went to an establishment like that which hurt her, it's the fact that he lied to her about where he was and said that he was at Delmonico's, which is just an outright betrayal of trust and would automatically put suspicions in her mind that he was up to no good. Marian was heartbroken that she was lied to, and the fact that she said to Peggy secrets and lies are not any foundation to build a marriage showed that that was what hurt the most. Oscar tried his best to do Larry a solid and not tell Marian where it was that he saw Maud, considering it was his brother-in-law that told him the location of her, but there was simply no avoiding it. This led Marian to write a letter and leave it with Mr. Church for when Larry returned, which essentially informed him that they were no longer engaged. It seems like there isn't going to be a reason as to why she's called off the engagement in the letter, which is most likely going to make the Russell family assume that it had something to do with Bertha's meddling. So again, it's going to put more strain on the family and cause a divide between Larry and his mother. So I feel like this is going to be contributing to the George and Bertha divide even more, as George will most likely stand by his son. Peggy and Dr. Kirkland. So Dr. Kirkland is willing to exchange fisticuffs with Mr. Fortune, but he's not prepared to stand up to his mother. Interesting, right? With Frances Watkins Harper, a prominent suffrage figure of the time, hosting a talk that Peggy invited many women to, Dr. Kirkland asked her if his mother could attend, which just seemed like a recipe for disaster, considering that she doesn't really want progression for women based on previous conversations. But then paired that with the fact that Dr. Kirkland naively didn't even tell his mother what the meeting was about. She simply started spouting to the group how women didn't need the vote and that if their husband had the vote, then that was enough. There's a clear divide between Peggy and Mrs. Kirkland, and no matter how much Peggy likes Dr. Kirkland, it's gonna come down to him standing up to his mother and maybe even being willing to lose her to give them the freedom to be together. Peggy's mother said, "When you marry, you take on the whole family. Is he strong enough to stand against his mother?" And Dorothy, I sadly don't think he is. We saw him say to his mother, "I'd be proud of a wife that fought for reform and equality." But she responded and said, "You'd be proud of a woman, not a wife." So she's still not on the same side as him. Jack. The news about Jack's money that he made from the clock was revealed to Agnes by the sour Miss Armstrong, and both Agnes and Ada thought it'd be best that Jack moved on. We know that working at the Forte household was more than just work for him. It was a home and it was family, something that he'd never really had before, and he expressed that towards Ada. When he left, there were a lot of emotional goodbyes, but we saw that he put everybody's return on investment in a letter that he left to them, which was far more than what they all invested. Even putting some money in Miss Armstrong's envelope, showing that he was a kind, caring and considerate man. We actually saw Miss Armstrong feeling slightly bad because it was her doing that got him thrown out. So I wonder if this will be the last that we'll see of Jack, or if we'll see him somewhere else in the show. My review of the episode. A 1-hour episode of the Gilded Age? I knew it was going to be a good one when I saw that runtime. There was so much that happened in this episode that it just made for some great viewing. I did think it was a tad choppy at points because there was arguably too much, but I'd rather have too much than not enough. One of the most underrated moments in this episode for me was Agnes consoling Ada as she was expressing her heartbreak over Luke and that she'd been played by the spiritual medium. Agnes said, "Luke is everywhere you are because he's in your heart," and that line quite literally broke me. Agnes doesn't often have tender moments because she's as frosty as they come, but when she does have those delicate moments of comfort, they're often given in the warmest of ways. That moment made me well up slightly, which I really didn't expect. My favourite arc to follow in this episode was Bertha and Gladys. Seeing the mother and daughter essentially be a mother and daughter and Gladys learn from her and not be around her in tears was so nice to see for a change. Even seeing Hector change his behaviour and it start to seem like there was maybe some kind of romantic spark that could occur, or at least a bit more of a happy marriage, just made me feel better for Gladys. It showed how influential Bertha was, even being able to take charge in a home that wasn't her own. That ending as well. I didn't expect the death of John Adams to come out of the blue like that. It was a twist that genuinely came out of nowhere. It went from a moment of love and compliments to a moment of death and devastation, and it just played with my mood so much. It was great writing. Honestly, I can't believe we've only got 2 episodes left in the season. I know it might be a bit too early to say this because there are 2 more episodes, but I think this is the best season that the Gilded Age has given us. The drama has just been top tier, the performances have been the strongest they've ever been, and I'm just hooked to seeing what happens in it every single week. I just hope that it gets renewed for a 4th season. So, there you have it, the Gilded Age Season 3 Episode 6, Ending Explained. If you want to see every episode of the Gilded Age Season 3 being broken down, then check the playlist below. I'm covering every episode. What did you think of this week's episode? Share your thoughts in the comments. As always, thanks for tuning into the video and I'll see you in the next one.